Let's go on to a question that comes up a lot, and we might as well just answer it now. I know you've answered it in writing quite a bit, and that's the old Bitcoin question, the question that will not go away. Somebody wanted to know where Hans Sennholz would have stood on Bitcoin vis-a-vis his book Money and Freedom, but I'm less interested in the specific issue of Sennholz than I am in the question of Bitcoin and Austrian economics and the regression theorem problem. Now, some listeners will know exactly what we're talking about Bitcoin and the regression theorem. Some people will know Bitcoin, they won't know regression theorem. Some will know regression theorem, they won't know Bitcoin. And some won't know anything that we're talking about here. So do your best to explain these concepts, like why it is that this would demand an explanation in the first place, and then tell me if you've got one.
Okay. So the standard way Austrians would teach monetary theory, and I did this when I was a college professor at Hillsdale. I did it writing the study guides to human action and theory of money and credit and so on. So this is standard stuff, and I'm not criticizing it, is to say that the first point is, hey, we don't need to assume there was a wise king or a political ruler or some chief of the tribe who suddenly grasped the idea of money and then imposed it on everybody. That we can explain using the narrative that Menger taught us and that Mises refined. We can explain how money spontaneously would have been adopted by a community that originally started out in barter. All right, and so we can go through and tell that story. And Mises, several places, says words to the effect that there is a historical element when it comes to money that is not true in other areas. Like we can value a capital good without knowing anything about its purchasing power. We can just say, well, this machinery, this hammer would help me with these nails to make a doghouse, and I know how much I would value a doghouse subjectively, so now I can kind of figure out how much I value the hammer and the nails as means to an end. Like, we don't need to rely on market prices to make that sort of judgment. But when it comes to accepting something, intending to use it as a medium of exchange, we necessarily need to know what is the purchasing power of this thing, because otherwise how would we know how to value it as a means to acquiring further goods if you didn't have any clue as to how much it could buy you? And just to motivate that, it'd be like, suppose you went into a coma and then you woke up and people revived you in the year 2080, and they said, hey, how's it going? You're from the past. This is great. We'd love to have your story, and we have this publisher here and wants to buy the rights to you, the guy who just woke up after a coma for 50 years, and we're going to give you $2 million for the rights to that. Does that sound like a good deal? And you would be, in the year 2080, you'd say, wait a minute, I don't know how much $2 million buys right now. Let me go look at the prices first before I answer you. Because for all you know, a loaf of bread is $6,000, right? So it's the same sort of thing in general, and Mises says that it's unthinkable to imagine a good becoming a medium of exchange without it first having a history of being valued in the marketplace for its own, let's just say, intrinsic qualities. That's a bit misleading, but the point is something had to be useful in trade before it became a medium of exchange, before people could then extrapolate and sort of piggyback the medium of exchange value on top of the fact that it was its original commodity. So gold and silver, tobacco, other things, cattle that have historically been served as money in different communities and at different times, those all you can explain why they were valued originally before they became a medium of exchange. Okay, so that's standard stuff, and it seemed unassailable logic when I used to teach it. The problem then is how do you fit Bitcoin into that narrative? Because it seems like Bitcoin was developed to be a money in the first place. Like, it's not that it did something else, and then people later said, oh, we can also use it as a medium of exchange. No, it was designed from day one to be a medium of exchange or a money. And so that's the superficial problem. And so you had some Austrian fans saying when Bitcoin first came out, and some to this day will say, end of story, Bitcoin is not money, it will never be money, it can't be, because if it is, then Mises is wrong, and we know Mises isn't wrong. And then you have other people saying Mises is wrong, Bitcoin violates the regression theorem, and so, there you go. Some people make mistakes sometimes, even giants like Mises.
Right, and then you have people who say Mises was right, and Bitcoin does not, in fact, violate the regression theorem. And now, is that the Murphy view?
I'm not sure. let me state what I am sure of first, and then I'll get into murkier territory. So for sure, I would say it is incorrect for people to claim that empirically Bitcoin will never get adopted by enough people for us to say, okay, it really is a money at this point because of the regression theorem. And the reason for that is, if you go and read Mises carefully and think through the logic of what he's saying, he wasn't merely saying something could never become a money that means it's widely accepted as a medium of exchange. He was saying something can't even get off the ground to be a medium of exchange, period, even to have one person accept it, not because of what he was going to do with it, but because he was going to trade it away.
Right. And the reason for that is that it doesn't have a pre-existing array of prices in terms of itself. Like, there wasn't a Bitcoin price for, well, I won't pick a pizza entirely at random, pizza or anything else. There was no existing array of prices, so therefore, how would you know how valuable it was? How could you start offering it in exchange for things if you don't know what the array of Bitcoin prices is? And there is no existing array of Bitcoin prices, so how can it get off the ground? Yet it did get off the ground, and that does seem prima facie to contradict this, at least this strong Misesian claim.
Right. So the people who, so I guess I'm partly warning people too that don't say this can never be a money, because that would mean Mises is wrong, because I think you're setting it up for the possibility that Mises is going to be disproven in quotation marks, because it already got past the hurdle of being a medium of, so Bitcoin right now clearly is a medium of exchange. Some people are accepting it, intending to trade it away again for other goods and services, and so it's already surpassed that hurdle. Now, as far as, okay, so what does that mean then? Is it actually that Mises is right and we can somehow reconcile? There have been attempts to do that by saying, well, we can, people were accepting Bitcoin as a payment system or technology. I don't quite like that, because, again, I think this is the same problem is there. Then what good is it to have a payment technology for something that's worthless? All right, or how do you know how much to value the payment infrastructure? The fact that you can almost instantly and costlessly send payment to somebody in Africa so long as he's got an internet connection. I don't see how would you value the ability of having access to that infrastructure if you didn't know anything about the purchasing power of the coins involved.
Exactly. So let me clarify this. So a way that I have indeed seen people try to deal with this problem is to say what you're saying, which is that Bitcoin is not just a currency, it's also a payment system. And since the payment system is something that's valued, then Bitcoin does have a starting value of some sort that helps to get the thing started. But you're saying that given the payment system itself can't be valued unless you can put some kind of value on Bitcoin as a currency. So this just pushes the problem back a stage.
Right, exactly. Because you could know, I definitely want to accept Bitcoin and have that in my portfolio because I can buy things with it so easily. But it's still, if you say, okay, so someone wants to buy my car for Bitcoin, how many should I ask for? The fact that you know it's a great payment system, that doesn't answer the original problem, because you need to know, well, okay, how much, what kind of things can Bitcoin buy in the marketplace to know whether my car should be sold for $800 or $2. What I think happened is, whether you want to say it's a violation of me or like a loophole in what he said, is I think clearly what did happen, I mean, there's no ambiguity about it, is the original Bitcoins were sold for, they had very little purchasing power, right? I think the first real transaction was some people bought a pizza from somebody,
right,
and gave them a large number of Bitcoins for it. And so I think way back then it was more of a novelty, and people were just, people do all kinds of silly things like trade playing cards or things like that. You have pictures of their sci-fi heroes or whatever. And so I think back then it was sort of like a nerdy thing to do, and people understood the technology and whatever. And maybe they had some inkling that, wow, if this thing took off, these would be good things to hold. And so there could have been a speculative element. And so there's a lot of stuff packed into there. But for sure, somebody gave up a pizza in exchange for things that had no prior purchasing power. And but why was that why did Mises see that? Well, because they were extremely weak. The guy just gave up a pizza. It's not like he sold his house for him. And so I think that's what happened. And then once you start getting some objective prices in line that could form as a foundation, then it just bootstrapped on top of that. So the way I would say it is, let me put it to you this way, just to be honest. I think if you had told me what Bitcoin was in 2005 and then said, do you predict that will ever take off? I'm not sure, but I think I might have said I don't think that's going to work. How could that get off the ground? I might have said that. I mean, it's hard for me now to think back then, knowing what I know, but it wouldn't surprise me if I said, no, that's impossible. And so clearly, let me put it this way, clearly people who studied the regression theorem may have had views about what was possible that were too restrictive.